Sarah Mitchell stood in the principal's office, her hands shaking as she tried to explain why she needed to leave school early again. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Mr. Henderson's skeptical face. This was the third time this month, and she could see the doubt growing in his eyes. "My mom needs me at the doctor's appointment," Sarah said quietly, clutching her backpack straps. "She can't drive herself anymore." Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair, his expression hardening. "Sarah, I'm going to need to speak with your mother directly. These absences are becoming a pattern, and, frankly, your stories don't add up." The word stories hit Sarah like a slap. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. Around school, whispers had already started. Teachers exchanged glances when she asked for extensions on homework. Classmates rolled their eyes when she declined invitations to hang out after school. Everyone thought she was making excuses, creating elaborate lies to get out of responsibilities. "They're not stories," Sarah whispered, but her voice lacked the strength to convince anyone, including herself some days. The truth was complicated, messier than anyone at Riverside High could understand. Sarah's mother, Captain Elena Mitchell, had returned from her third deployment in Afghanistan 18 months ago. To everyone else, she appeared to be the same decorated Navy SEAL who had earned respect and admiration throughout their small military town. Elena still stood tall, still spoke with authority, still maintained the crisp appearance that had defined her 20-year career. But Sarah knew the truth that her mother hid behind a carefully constructed facade. The nightmares that jolted Elena awake at 3 a.m, leaving her disoriented and drenched in sweat. The panic attacks that struck without warning, sending Elena to her bedroom where she'd lock the door and emerge hours later with red-rimmed eyes. The medications that made her mother's hands shake so badly she couldn't hold a coffee cup steady. The appointments weren't just medical checkups. They were sessions with psychiatrists, consultations with neurologists, visits to specialists who spoke in quiet tones about traumatic brain injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder. Elena Mitchell, the woman who had led rescue missions behind enemy lines, now struggled to navigate the aisles of a grocery store when they became too crowded. "I'll need documentation," Mr. Henderson continued, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. "A note from the doctor, a letter from your mother, something official. I can't keep excusing these absences based on your word alone." Sarah nodded, knowing that getting documentation would mean asking her mother to admit vulnerability. Elena had built her entire identity around strength, around being the soldier who never broke, who never showed weakness. Asking for a letter would mean shattering the careful illusion Elena maintained for the outside world. After school, Sarah walked home through the familiar streets of Coastal View, a town that existed primarily to support the nearby naval base. American flags hung from almost every porch, yellow ribbon magnets decorated car bumpers, and military families filled the neighborhoods with a sense of shared purpose and pride. The Mitchell house sat on Maple Street, a modest two-story home with white siding and blue shutters. Elena had chosen it specifically because it reminded her of the house she'd grown up in before joining the military. The yard was meticulously maintained, the hedges trimmed with military precision, the American flag hanging prominently by the front door. Sarah found her mother in the garage, methodically cleaning and organizing tools that were already spotless. It was one of Elena's coping mechanisms, this need to control and organize everything in her environment. The garage had become Elena's sanctuary, a place where she could impose order when her mind felt chaotic. "How was school?" Elena asked without looking up from the wrench she was polishing. "Fine," Sarah lied, the word coming automatically. She'd learned to shield her mother from additional stress, even though the isolation was wearing her down. Elena's hands paused in their movement. Even damaged, her instincts remained sharp. "What happened?" Sarah hesitated, watching her mother's profile. Elena Mitchell had been beautiful once, with sharp cheekbones and bright green eyes that commanded attention. The beauty remained, but something essential had dimmed. The confidence had been replaced by a constant vigilance, as if Elena was always prepared for an attack that might never come. "Mr. Henderson wants documentation for my absences," Sarah finally said. Elena's jaw tightened, and Sarah saw the familiar flash of anger that preceded her mother's darker moments. "Documentation for what? For taking care of your own mother?" He thinks I'm lying, Sarah said quietly. Everyone thinks I'm lying. The wrench clattered to the garage floor, and Elena stood abruptly. Who thinks you're lying? Give me names. This was the other Elena, the one who emerged when she felt cornered or threatened. The soldier who had once interrogated prisoners and led men into combat. Sarah had learned to recognize the signs and retreat before Elena's protective instincts turned destructive. It's not a big deal, Mom. I can handle it. No. Elena's voice carried the authority that had once commanded respect from hardened soldiers. You shouldn't have to handle anything. You're 17 years old. You should be worried about prom and college applications, not managing your broken mother's schedule. The word broken hung between them like a confession. Elena rarely acknowledged her struggles so directly, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. You're not broken, Sarah said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Elena picked up the wrench and resumed her cleaning, but her movements had lost their earlier precision. I used to defuse bombs, Sarah. Actual bombs. I could field strip a rifle blindfolded and navigate hostile territory with nothing but a compass and the stars. Now I can't sit through a movie without checking the exits. Sarah moved closer, settling on an overturned crate nearby. This was as close to honest conversation as they'd had in months, and she didn't want to waste the opportunity. The doctor said it gets easier, Sarah offered, though Dr. Reeves had actually said recovery was possible, not guaranteed. The doctor says a lot of things. Elena's voice carried a bitterness that made Sarah's chest ache. The doctor didn't spend 3 tours watching kids die. The doctor didn't have to make decisions that saved some lives and cost others. Elena had never spoken about her deployments in detail, but Sarah had pieced together fragments over the years. Award ceremonies where Elena's achievements were read aloud. Newspaper articles about a female Navy SEAL who had rescued hostages. Whispered conversations between Elena and her military friends that stopped when Sarah entered the room. Captain Elena Mitchell had been exceptional, the kind of soldier who became legendary within her unit. Sarah had grown up proud of her mother's service, understanding that Elena was part of something larger and more important than their small family. But pride had gradually been replaced by worry as Elena struggled to transition back to civilian life. What if I just withdraw from school? Sarah suggested, the words escaping before she could stop them. Elena's head snapped up, her green eyes blazing. Absolutely not. Your education is not negotiable. But if I'm not in school, I can be here when you need me. I can drive you to appointments, help with the shopping, manage the phone calls with insurance companies. Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. Elena's voice carried the full weight of her military authority. You are not responsible for taking care of me. That's not how this works. But it was how it worked, and they both knew it. Sarah had been managing Elena's care for months, learning to recognize the signs of impending panic attacks, scheduling medical appointments around Elena's good days, creating routines that helped her mother navigate each day without falling apart. Elena set down her tools and really looked at Sarah for the first time in their conversation. What she saw seemed to surprise her. Sarah had grown taller over the past year, her face losing the roundness of childhood and taking on the angular features that marked Elena's family. But, more than physical changes, Elena seemed to notice the weight Sarah carried, the premature responsibility that had settled on her shoulders like an ill-fitting uniform. You look tired, Elena said softly. I'm fine. That's my line, Elena said with a weak smile. We're both terrible liars. Sarah felt tears threatening, the exhaustion of maintaining their careful pretense finally catching up with her. I don't know what to tell people anymore. They think I'm making everything up, but I can't explain what's really happening without breaking your privacy. Elena was quiet for a long time, her hands still except for the slight tremor that medication couldn't completely control. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible above the garage fan. I'm scared, Sarah. It was the first time Elena had admitted fear about anything other than crowds or loud noises. This was deeper, more fundamental. Scared of what? Of being weak. Of people seeing me as anything other than the soldier I used to be. Elena's voice broke slightly. Of you growing up thinking your mother is a coward. Sarah stood and moved to Elena's side, something she rarely did since Elena's need for personal space had become more pronounced. You're the bravest person I know. I hide in my bedroom when the garbage truck comes by because the engine sounds like a Humvee. You went to war 3 times to protect people you'd never met. I can't drive through certain parts of town because they remind me of places where people died. You came home when a lot of people didn't. Elena looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and Sarah saw something she hadn't seen in months. Recognition. Not just of Sarah as her daughter, but as a person carrying her own burdens and making her own sacrifices. I should go to your school, Elena said finally. Mom, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Elena's voice was gaining strength. If they think you're lying, they need to hear the truth. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief because finally, someone would vouch for her, terror because she wasn't sure Elena was ready for the scrutiny that would come with revealing her struggles. Are you sure? Elena straightened to her full height, and, for a moment, Sarah glimpsed the commanding officer her mother had been. Captain Elena Mitchell doesn't raise liars. And she sure as hell doesn't let anyone call her daughter one. The next morning, Sarah arrived at school with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Elena had promised to come in during Sarah's lunch period, but a dozen things could derail that plan. A bad morning, an unexpected trigger, the simple overwhelm of leaving their carefully controlled environment. Sarah's first 3 classes passed in a blur of distraction. She checked her phone repeatedly, looking for text messages from her mother. During passing periods, she found herself scanning the parking lot for Elena's silver Honda, though she knew her mother wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours. In English class, Mrs. Patterson assigned partners for a project on contemporary heroes. Sarah found herself paired with Jake Morrison, a popular athlete who had never spoken to her before this moment. So, Jake said, settling into the desk beside her. Who should we pick? Like, a celebrity or something? Maybe someone in the military, Sarah suggested, thinking of her mother. Jake made a face. Nah, that's too obvious. Everyone picks military people. What about, like, a YouTuber who does charity work? Sarah bit back her response. To Jake, military service was probably just an abstract concept, something that happened to other people's families. He couldn't understand that heroism sometimes looked like getting out of bed when every instinct screamed to hide under the covers. Whatever you think is best, Sarah said, not having the energy to argue. The lunch bell rang, and Sarah's stomach clenched with anxiety. She made her way to the main office, unsure whether she hoped Elena would be there or not. Part of her wanted the validation, the proof that she hadn't been lying. But another part feared what would happen when Elena's carefully maintained facade cracked under public scrutiny. The office was busy with the usual lunch period chaos. Students checking in late, teachers picking up mail, parents handling various administrative tasks. Sarah approached Mrs. Kelly, the secretary, with sweaty palms. Is my mom here? Elena Mitchell? Mrs. Kelly glanced at her computer screen. She checked in about 10 minutes ago. She's waiting in conference room B with Mr. Henderson. Sarah's heart raced. Elena had actually come. Despite the difficulty of leaving home, despite the risk of exposure, Elena had kept her promise. Conference room B was a small space used for parent meetings and disciplinary conferences. Through the window, Sarah could see 2 figures sitting across from each other at the oval table. Elena sat with perfect military posture, her hands folded in front of her, her expression neutral but alert. Mr. Henderson leaned back in his chair, apparently mid-sentence. Sarah knocked and entered when beckoned. Ah, Sarah, Mr. Henderson said, his tone noticeably different from their previous interactions. Your mother and I were just discussing your attendance situation. Elena turned to look at Sarah, and something in her expression had changed. The careful mask was still in place, but underneath it, Sarah detected a resolve she hadn't seen in months. Sit down, sweetheart, Elena said, her voice carrying a warmth that had been absent recently. Mr. Henderson shuffled through a stack of papers. Your mother has been explaining the family circumstances that have required your absences. I want to apologize for suggesting you were being dishonest. Sarah felt a flush of vindication mixed with relief. Finally, someone in authority believed her. Mrs. Mitchell, Mr. Henderson continued, I had no idea about your service record or your current situation. If I had understood, you had no reason to understand, Elena interrupted smoothly. My daughter has been protecting my privacy, which I appreciate. But, she shouldn't have to carry that burden alone. Elena reached into her purse and withdrew a folder. I've brought documentation of my medical appointments and a letter from my physician explaining my current needs. Sarah has been serving as my caregiver while I navigate some health challenges related to my military service. Mr. Henderson accepted the folder with obvious discomfort. This really wasn't necessary. Your word is more than sufficient. No, Elena said firmly. My daughter's integrity was questioned. Documentation ensures that doesn't happen again. Sarah watched this exchange with fascination. This was Elena in command mode, handling a situation with the same tactical precision she'd once used in military operations. The confidence was still there, buried under months of struggle but not destroyed. I'll make sure this information is shared appropriately with Sarah's teachers, Mr. Henderson said. And, please know that we'll be flexible with attendance requirements moving forward. I appreciate that, Elena said, standing to signal the meeting's end. But, I don't want special treatment for Sarah. I want understanding. There's a difference. As they left the building together, Sarah felt lighter than she had in months. The constant weight of defending herself, of being seen as dishonest, had been lifted. Thank you, Sarah said as they reached Elena's car. Elena paused with her hand on the driver's side door. I should have done this sooner. You shouldn't have had to face that alone. I know you've been dealing with a lot, that's not an excuse. Elena's voice was firm but not harsh. Being your mother is my first job, before being a soldier, before being a patient, before anything else. They drove home in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Sarah noticed Elena's grip on the steering wheel was looser than usual, her shoulders less rigid. Something had shifted during that meeting, some internal balance had been restored. But, Sarah also sensed that this was just the beginning. Elena's appearance at school had solved one immediate problem while potentially creating others. Word would spread that Captain Mitchell was dealing with health issues. Questions would be asked. The carefully constructed privacy Elena had maintained would begin to erode. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah realized that her mother had made a choice. Elena had chosen Sarah's well-being over her own need for privacy. She had stepped back into public view, not as the unshakable soldier she'd once been, but as a human being dealing with the invisible wounds of war. It was, Sarah thought, perhaps the bravest thing Elena had ever done. The news of Elena Mitchell's visit to Riverside High spread through the school's social networks faster than Sarah had expected. By the following Monday, the whispers had changed tone entirely. Instead of skeptical glances and eye rolls, Sarah now received sympathetic looks and careful questions about her mother's condition. Is it true your mom was a Navy SEAL? Ashley Chen asked during chemistry class, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and curiosity. Sarah nodded, still adjusting to this new reality where her family's private struggles had become semi-public knowledge. She served for 20 years. That's so cool, Ashley continued. My dad was in the army, but he was just logistics. Never saw combat or anything. The comment stung, though Sarah knew Ashley didn't mean it maliciously. The assumption that Elena's experiences were somehow exciting or glamorous showed how little people understood about the real cost of military service. Sarah had learned over the past 18 months that there was nothing cool about watching your mother jump at unexpected sounds or struggle to sleep through the night. But, the attention also brought unexpected benefits. Teachers who had previously been skeptical of Sarah's absences now offered extensions on assignments without question. Classmates who had avoided her because they thought she was irresponsible now made efforts to include her in conversations and group projects. The change was most noticeable in Mr. Henderson's behavior. The principal who had demanded documentation now went out of his way to check on Sarah's well-being. He established a system where Sarah could text the office if she needed to leave for a family emergency, eliminating the need for lengthy explanations. However, the newfound understanding came with its own complications. People wanted details that Sarah wasn't prepared to share. They asked about Elena's deployments, her decorations, her current symptoms. Each question required Sarah to navigate the delicate balance between satisfying curiosity and protecting her mother's privacy. The situation became more complex when local media caught wind of the story. Coastal View was a small town where news traveled quickly, and a decorated female Navy SEAL struggling with post-deployment challenges fit perfectly into ongoing national conversations about veteran care and military families. Sarah first learned about media interest when Elena's phone started ringing persistently on a Tuesday afternoon. Elena had been having a good day, working in her garden and even humming softly while she planted new bulbs for spring. The phone's shrill ring cut through the peaceful afternoon like a siren. "Mrs. Mitchell? This is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I'd like to speak with you about your daughter's situation at Riverside High School." Elena's face went pale as she listened to the reporter's request. Sarah watched her mother's hands begin to tremble, the phone shaking against her ear. "I have no comment," Elena said, her voice clipped and professional. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're doing a story about military families and the challenges of reintegration. Your experience could help other veterans." Elena hung up without another word, but the damage was done. The outside world had found them, threatening to pierce the protective bubble they'd carefully constructed. "How did they find out?" Elena asked, sinking into a kitchen chair. Sarah felt a surge of guilt. "I'm sorry. Maybe I should have just dealt with the school situation on my own." "No." Elena's voice was sharp. "You did nothing wrong. This is exactly why I avoided getting help for so long. Everyone wants to turn personal struggles into public narratives." The phone rang again, and Elena simply unplugged it from the wall. But, that evening, they discovered that other reporters had called Sarah's school, Elena's former commanding officers, and even their neighbors. The story was building momentum whether they participated or not. The real crisis came 3 days later when Sarah arrived home to find Elena sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by scattered photographs and military documents. Elena's face was streaked with tears, and her breathing was rapid and shallow. "Mom?" Sarah dropped her backpack and knelt beside Elena. "They called the base," Elena whispered. "A reporter called my old unit, asking about my service record. Commander Rodriguez had to brief my former teammates about media inquiries." Sarah understood immediately why this was devastating. Elena's military identity had been built on strength, leadership, and the respect of her peers. The thought of those same people learning about her current struggles through a news story felt like a profound betrayal of everything she'd worked to achieve. "Did you talk to Commander Rodriguez?" Elena nodded, wiping her nose with a tissue. "He was kind. Said the whole unit supports me and that I should call if I need anything." "But," I could hear it in his voice, Sarah. "Pity. He pities me." Maybe it wasn't pity. Maybe it was concern. It's the same thing when you used to be someone people looked up to. Elena gathered the photographs with shaking hands. They were pictures from her deployments, formal portraits in dress uniforms, candid shots of Elena with her unit members. In every image, Elena looked confident, capable, unbreakable. The contrast with the woman sitting on the floor was stark and painful. "I can't do this," Elena said, her voice barely audible. "I can't be the poster child for wounded veterans. I can't have strangers analyzing my struggles for entertainment value." Sarah felt a familiar weight settling on her shoulders. Elena was retreating again, pulling back from the tentative progress she'd made at the school meeting. The protective instincts that had driven Elena to defend Sarah were now turning inward, creating barriers against a world that felt increasingly threatening. "What if we controlled the narrative?" Sarah suggested carefully. Elena looked up, confusion replacing despair. "What do you mean?" Instead of letting reporters tell our story, what if we told it ourselves? On our terms, with our boundaries. It was a risky suggestion. Sarah knew that engaging with media could backfire spectacularly, potentially exposing Elena to more scrutiny than she could handle. But the alternative seemed to be watching her mother disappear entirely behind walls of fear and shame. Elena was quiet for several minutes, considering Sarah's proposal. When she spoke, her voice carried a hint of the strategic thinking that had made her an effective military leader. What would that look like? I don't know exactly. Maybe an interview where we focus on families dealing with invisible injuries. Not just your story, but how it affects everyone. You'd be willing to do that? To have strangers know about our situation? Sarah realized she'd been dreading this moment for months. The thought of public exposure terrified her almost as much as it did Elena. But watching her mother crumble under the weight of shame and secrecy had been worse than any embarrassment she might face. If it helps other kids who are going through the same thing, yes. Elena gathered the photographs into a neat stack, her movements becoming more deliberate. Sarah recognized this shift in her mother's demeanor. It was the moment when Elena stopped being a victim of circumstances and started becoming a strategist. We'd need conditions, Elena said. Complete control over what information is shared. No surprise questions. No filming in our home. We could meet with them somewhere neutral. Maybe at the school. And no sensationalism. This isn't about hero worship or tragedy porn. It's about reality. Sarah felt a spark of hope. This was the most engaged Elena had been in planning anything since her return from deployment. The prospect of reclaiming control over their narrative seemed to be awakening something that had been dormant. They spent the next hour outlining their conditions and preparing talking points. Elena approached it like a military briefing, identifying objectives, potential risks, and desired outcomes. Sarah watched her mother's transformation with amazement. Purpose, even uncomfortable purpose, seemed to strengthen Elena in ways that rest and isolation had not. When Jennifer Walsh called again the next day, Elena was ready. Sarah listened from the kitchen as Elena negotiated the terms of their participation with the precision of someone conducting a hostage negotiation. "We'll do one interview," Elena said clearly. "At my daughter's school, with specific time limits and predetermined topics. You'll provide questions in advance, and we retain the right to decline answering anything we deem too personal." Sarah could hear the reporter's excited agreement through the phone. This was exactly the kind of authentic story that news outlets craved. The interview was scheduled for the following Friday afternoon in Riverside High's library. Elena spent the intervening days preparing with the same intensity she'd once brought to mission planning. She researched Jennifer Walsh's previous stories, practiced answers to potential questions, and even consulted with a veterans advocacy group about effective messaging. "Why are you putting so much effort into this?" Sarah asked the night before the interview. Elena looked up from the notes she'd been reviewing. "Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. No one gets to define our story except us." But, beneath Elena's strategic preparation, Sarah detected deeper motivations. Her mother seemed to be reclaiming parts of herself that had been lost in the struggle with post-deployment adjustment. The planning, the purpose, the sense of mission, these were elements that had defined Elena's military career and had been largely absent from her civilian life. On Friday morning, Elena woke early and went through a routine she hadn't followed in months. She exercised, showered, and dressed in clothes that were crisp and professional without being overly formal. When Sarah came downstairs for breakfast, she found her mother standing straighter, moving with more confidence than she'd shown in recent memory. "You look good, Mom." Elena smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that had become rare. "I feel more like myself than I have in a long time." At school, Sarah's classmates watched with curiosity as news crews set up equipment in the library. Word had spread that Sarah's mother was doing an interview, and several students lingered in the hallway hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary Captain Mitchell. Jennifer Walsh arrived with a small crew and immediately began trying to reshape the agreed-upon parameters. She wanted to film in Elena's home, suggested bringing in other veterans for a panel discussion, and pushed for details about specific combat experiences. Sarah watched her mother handle each attempt to expand the scope with calm firmness. "We discussed the format," Elena said. "These are the terms. If they don't work for your story, we can end this now." The reporter backed down, apparently recognizing that Elena wasn't someone who could be manipulated or pressured into compromising her boundaries. The interview itself lasted 40 minutes and covered topics ranging from the challenges of military families to the importance of supporting children of veterans. Elena spoke clearly and honestly about her struggles while maintaining dignity and strength. She acknowledged her limitations without self-pity and emphasized the resilience she'd learned from both military service and motherhood. Sarah's portion of the interview focused on the practical realities of supporting a parent with invisible injuries. She talked about the isolation, the difficulty of explaining her situation to peers, and the importance of understanding that children in military families often carry responsibilities beyond their years. "What would you want people to know about families like yours?" Jennifer Walsh asked as the interview concluded. Sarah glanced at her mother, drawing strength from Elena's encouraging nod. "We're not looking for pity or special treatment. We just want understanding. Sometimes the bravest thing someone can do is ask for help. And sometimes the most important service happens at home, not on a battlefield." Elena reached over and squeezed Sarah's hand, a gesture of pride and solidarity that the cameras captured perfectly. After the news crew left, Elena and Sarah sat together in the now quiet library. The afternoon sun slanted through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across empty tables and vacant chairs. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing the experience. "Scared," she admitted. "But also relieved. Like I finally stopped hiding from something that was going to find me anyway." Sarah understood. They'd spent months trying to control information, manage perceptions, and maintain privacy. But secrecy had become its own kind of prison, isolating them from potential support and understanding. "Do you think people will judge us?" "Some will," Elena said honestly. "But the people whose opinions matter will understand that strength comes in many forms, including the strength to admit when you need help." As they walked home together, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted in their relationship. For months, she'd been the caretaker, the protector, the one managing their family's public face. But today, Elena had reclaimed her role as Sarah's mother and defender. She'd stepped into public view not as a victim sharing her pain, but as a leader modeling how to face challenges with dignity and purpose. The interview would air in 3 days, potentially reaching thousands of people throughout their region. Sarah felt nervous about the exposure but also hopeful. If their story helped even one family feel less alone, the risk would be worthwhile. That evening, Elena cooked dinner for the first time in weeks, humming softly as she prepared one of Sarah's favorite meals. The kitchen filled with familiar aromas and the comfortable sounds of domestic life. When they sat down to eat, Elena raised her glass of water in a mock toast. "To telling our own story," she said. "To telling our own story," Sarah echoed, clinking her glass against her mother's. Outside, the sun set over Coastal View, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside the Mitchell house, 2 women who had learned to navigate trauma together prepared for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, knowing they would face them with honesty, dignity, and an unshakable bond forged through the hardest times of their lives. The interview aired on Channel 7's Monday evening newscast, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. By Tuesday morning, Elena's phone had filled with voicemails from other military families, veteran advocacy groups, and local organizations offering support. What surprised both Elena and Sarah most was that the majority of messages were positive, expressing gratitude rather than judgment. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Patricia Valdez from the Military Family Support Center," one message began. "Thank you for sharing your story. We've had dozens of calls today from families who saw your interview and, finally, feel ready to seek help." Sarah listened to these messages with her mother, watching Elena's expression shift from apprehension to wonder. They'd expected criticism and invasive questions. Instead, they'd created a bridge for others who had been struggling in isolation. The most meaningful call came from Commander Rodriguez, Elena's former commanding officer. Sarah watched her mother's posture straighten as she answered the phone, the automatic response to speaking with a superior officer. Elena, the commander's voice carried warmth even through the phone speaker. I watched the interview last night. The entire unit did, actually. We had an impromptu gathering at Murphy's bar. Elena's face flushed. Sir, I hope, stop right there. What I hope is that you understand how proud we are. Not past tense proud of what you accomplished overseas, but present tense proud of what you're doing now. Sarah saw tears forming in her mother's eyes. Thank you, sir. That interview took more guts than anything you did in Afghanistan. Leading by example when you're at your most vulnerable? That's the kind of courage that defines true leaders. After the call ended, Elena sat quietly in the kitchen, staring at her hands. Sarah recognized this as processing time, the space Elena needed to integrate new information with her existing self-perception. He's right, you know, Sarah said softly. Elena looked up, her eyes still bright with unshed tears. About what? About courage. It's scary to let people see you when you're not at your strongest. I still feel like I failed them. Failed the image of what a Navy SEAL should be. Maybe that image needed to change. Elena smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Sarah's hand. When did you become so wise? I learned from watching someone figure out how to be brave in a completely different way. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Through the window, Sarah could see a woman in her 40s standing on their porch, holding a casserole dish and looking nervous. Elena answered the door cautiously, her military training making her automatically assess potential threats. Mrs. Mitchell? I'm Carol Thompson. I live 3 streets over. I saw your interview, and I wanted to bring this by. She held up the casserole dish. My husband did 2 tours in Iraq. He came home 5 years ago, and we're still figuring things out. Elena accepted the dish, her expression softening. Would you like to come in? Carol Thompson's story unfolded over coffee in the Mitchell kitchen. Her husband Dave struggled with similar challenges to Elena's, but their family had been dealing with them in complete isolation. Carol had been managing Dave's care while working full-time and raising 2 teenagers, feeling like she was drowning but unable to ask for help. I kept thinking other military wives handled things better, Carol admitted. Like there was something wrong with me for not being able to fix him. There's nothing wrong with you, Elena said firmly. And there's nothing to fix about Dave. There are things to manage, strategies to learn, support systems to build. But he's not broken, and neither are you. Sarah listened to this conversation with fascination. This was Elena in advisor mode, drawing on her own recent experiences to help someone else navigate similar challenges. Purpose was rebuilding Elena's confidence in ways that medication and therapy alone hadn't achieved. Over the following weeks, the Mitchell house became an informal gathering place for military families dealing with post-deployment adjustment. Elena didn't advertise this role, but word spread through the tight networks that connected military spouses and children. Sarah found herself part of an impromptu support group of teenagers whose parents struggled with invisible injuries from war. They met in the Mitchell living room on Thursday evenings, sharing experiences and strategies for managing their complex family dynamics. Do you ever feel angry at them? Asked Marcus, whose father had served in the Marines. Like, they volunteered for this, but we didn't get a choice. It was a question that Sarah had wrestled with privately for months. I used to, she admitted. But then, I realized that they didn't choose to get hurt. They chose to serve, but nobody chooses trauma. It's still hard, though, added Jennifer, whose mother was an Air Force veteran. Watching your parents struggle and not being able to help. You are helping, Elena said from the kitchen doorway, where she'd been listening while preparing snacks. Just by being present, by understanding, by continuing to love them through the difficult times. That help matters more than you realize. Elena had been making these appearances more frequently, offering guidance to the teenagers while receiving practical support from their parents in return. The community that formed around their shared challenges created something none of them had been able to achieve alone. The most significant change came 6 weeks after the interview aired, when Elena received a call from the Department of Veterans Affairs. They'd seen the news story and wanted to discuss Elena's involvement in a new pilot program designed to provide better support for military families dealing with post-deployment challenges. "They want me to help design training materials," Elena explained to Sarah after the call. "For VA staff, military family life counselors, school personnel. People who work with families like ours but might not understand the dynamics." Sarah felt a surge of pride. "That's perfect for you. I'd be traveling occasionally, attending meetings, maybe speaking at conferences. Are you okay with that?" The question represented a significant shift. For months, Elena had been so focused on her limitations that she'd stopped considering new opportunities. Now she was thinking strategically about how her experiences could serve a larger purpose. "I think it's exactly what you should be doing." Elena's involvement with the VA program began slowly, with phone consultations and review of draft materials. But, gradually, it expanded into site visits and presentations at military installations throughout the region. Sarah watched her mother regain confidence with each successful engagement. The work wasn't always easy. Elena still had difficult days when her symptoms flared or when particular triggers overwhelmed her coping mechanisms. But, now these setbacks felt temporary rather than defining. Elena had found a way to integrate her struggles into a larger sense of purpose. The transformation was most evident during a conference at a nearby military base where Elena was scheduled to speak about family resilience. Sarah attended as Elena's guest, watching from the back of a packed auditorium as her mother addressed several hundred active duty personnel and their families. 18 months ago, I couldn't sit through a movie without checking exits," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Today, I'm standing in front of you because I learned that recovery isn't about returning to who you were before. It's about integrating your experiences into who you're becoming." The audience was completely attentive, recognizing authenticity in Elena's words. This wasn't theoretical advice from someone who'd read about trauma in textbooks. This was practical wisdom from someone who'd lived through it and found ways to thrive. "Military families are resilient because we've learned to adapt to changing circumstances," Elena continued. "Deployment teaches us flexibility, problem solving, and the importance of supporting each other through difficult times. Post-deployment challenges require these same skills, just applied differently." Sarah felt tears forming as she listened to her mother speak with confidence and authority about their journey. Elena had transformed their private struggles into public service, using her experiences to help others navigate similar challenges. After the presentation, Elena was surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories or ask for advice. Sarah watched her mother engage with each person individually, offering the same focused attention she'd once given to military briefings. "Your mom is amazing," said a woman who appeared beside Sarah. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Rachel Martinez. My daughter is about your age, and we're dealing with some adjustment challenges. Hearing your mother's story gives me hope." "She's pretty incredible," Sarah agreed. "It took a while for her to see it, though." "That's the thing about courage," Rachel observed. "Sometimes you don't recognize it until you're looking back at what you've overcome." On the drive home, Elena was quiet, processing the day's events. When they stopped at a red light, she turned to Sarah with an expression of wonder. "Did you see how many people were taking notes?" Elena asked. "They were writing down things I said, like my experiences actually mattered." "Your experiences do matter. They always did. I know that now. But, for a long time, I thought admitting to struggles meant admitting to failure." The light turned green, and Elena continued driving through the familiar streets of Coastal View. The town looked the same as it had months earlier, but their relationship to it had changed completely. Instead of hiding within its boundaries, they'd become contributors to its community. "Sarah," Elena said as they pulled into their driveway, "I want you to know how proud I am of you." "For what?" "For holding our family together when I couldn't. For protecting my privacy while dealing with your own challenges. For suggesting that we take control of our story instead of letting others define it. Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest. For months, she'd focused on supporting Elena without considering her own needs or acknowledging her own growth. Now she realized she'd developed strengths and resilience that would serve her well beyond their current circumstances. We held it together, Sarah corrected. Both of us. Elena smiled, the expression bright and genuine. Both of us. That evening, they sat together on the back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Elena had her laptop open, working on draft guidelines for military family support programs. Sarah was reading applications for college scholarships, planning for a future that once seemed uncertain but now felt filled with possibility. The phone rang inside the house, probably another military family reaching out for guidance or a VA representative with questions about the pilot program. Elena glanced toward the house but didn't move to answer it. "Aren't you going to get that?" Sarah asked. "It can wait," Elena said, closing her laptop and giving Sarah her full attention. "Right now, I'm exactly where I need to be." Sarah leaned against her mother's shoulder, feeling the steady strength that had never truly disappeared, even during Elena's darkest moments. They'd learned that courage wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about breaking and, then, choosing to rebuild, stronger and more honest than before. In the distance, a jet from the naval base traced a white line across the darkening sky. 6 months ago, that sound might have triggered anxiety for Elena. Tonight, it was simply part of the background of their peaceful evening together. "Mom?" Sarah said quietly. "Mum. I'm glad people know our story now." Elena pressed a kiss to the top of Sarah's head. "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." As darkness settled over Coastal View, the Mitchell house glowed with warm light. Inside, a mother and daughter who had weathered the storm of invisible wounds together planned for tomorrow, knowing that whatever challenges came next, they would face them with honesty, courage, and an unshakable bond that had been tested and proven stronger than they'd ever imagined possible.